Let me say this clearly because most people are confused right from the start. Keto is not about eating low carb. Keto is about lowering insulin, stabilizing blood sugar, and training your body to burn fat instead of sugar. And one of the fastest ways to do that is by using zero carb foods strategically. Now, zero carb does not mean zero impact. These foods influence hormones, inflammation, satiety, and muscle preservation. So today, I'm reacting as a physician and breaking down the only 10 zero-carb foods you truly need on keto, why they work, the science behind them, and how to use them correctly in daily life. Keto was never meant to be a diet of deprivation, and the biggest lie ever sold to the public is that weight loss begins with eating fewer calories or fewer carbs, because the real driver of fat storage, fat release, and metabolic damage is a hormone most people have never been taught to fear: insulin. Every time you eat carbohydrates, especially refined carbs and sugars, insulin rises, and insulin's primary job is not energy, not nourishment, but storage. It tells your body to lock fat inside fat cells, to shut down fat burning, and to rely on sugar as its primary fuel. Decades of research now confirm that chronically elevated insulin is the common thread linking obesity, type 2 diabetes, fatty liver disease, heart disease, and even neurodegenerative disorders like Alzheimer's, which researchers now call type 3 diabetes. When insulin stays high, fat loss becomes biologically impossible, no matter how little you eat, and this is why millions of people fail on low-calorie diets while their metabolism slows, their hunger increases, and their health collapses. Keto flips this entire process on its head by attacking the root cause, not the symptom. When carbohydrates are removed and insulin drops, the body finally receives permission to access stored fat, and this shift is not subtle. It is dramatic, measurable, and life-altering. Studies show that within days of lowering insulin, the body increases lipolysis, the breakdown of fat, and begins producing ketones, a clean-burning fuel that generates more energy per unit than glucose, while producing fewer inflammatory byproducts. This is why people on keto often report mental clarity, stable energy, and reduced cravings long before significant weight loss even appears on the scale. Zero-carb foods accelerate this process because they remove insulin stimulation almost entirely, allowing glucagon, the fat-burning hormone, to dominate. Glucagon tells your liver to release stored energy, tells your fat cells to open, and tells your brain that fuel is abundant, which is why hunger fades instead of intensifying. This is not willpower. This is physiology. Research from metabolic ward studies shows that when insulin is suppressed, the body naturally regulates appetite, reducing caloric intake without conscious restriction. That's why people eating zero-carb or very low-carb diets often forget meals, not because they're disciplined, but because their hormones are finally aligned. Even more shocking is what happens at the cellular level. High insulin blocks autophagy, the body's internal recycling system that removes damaged cells, dysfunctional proteins, and metabolic waste. When insulin drops, autophagy turns back on, repairing tissues, improving mitochondrial efficiency, and reducing inflammation from the inside out. This is why keto is now being studied for conditions ranging from epilepsy and cancer metabolism to autoimmune disease and traumatic brain injury. Muscle preservation is another misunderstood piece of the puzzle. Critics claim keto causes muscle loss, yet the opposite is true when insulin is controlled and protein intake is adequate. Elevated insulin without proper signaling leads to muscle breakdown over time through insulin resistance, while low insulin paired with sufficient protein preserves lean mass by improving insulin sensitivity in muscle tissue. Clinical studies show that ketogenic diets maintain or even improve lean body mass compared to low-fat diets during weight loss, especially in older adults at risk for sarcopenia. This matters because muscle is not cosmetic tissue. It is a metabolic organ that controls glucose disposal, insulin sensitivity, and longevity. Every pound of muscle you lose accelerates aging and disease. Zero-carb foods provide the amino acids required to protect this tissue while keeping insulin low enough for fat loss to continue uninterrupted. The cardiovascular fear narrative also collapses under scientific scrutiny. When insulin drops, triglycerides fall, HDL cholesterol rises, and small, dense LDL particles, which are the most dangerous, decrease significantly. It is insulin resistance, not dietary fat, that drives atherosclerosis, and this has been demonstrated repeatedly in large-scale metabolic studies. Even blood pressure improves as insulin decreases, because insulin causes sodium retention and vascular stiffness when chronically elevated. Lower insulin means improved kidney function, better electrolyte balance, and reduced strain on the heart. Perhaps the most emotionally devastating truth is this. Millions of people blame themselves for metabolic failure that was hormonally inevitable. They followed the rules, counted the calories, exercised harder, ate heart-healthy grains, and still gained weight, lost energy, and developed chronic disease. Keto exposes the uncomfortable reality that the problem was never discipline. It was biology being ignored. Zero-carb foods simplify this correction by removing the guesswork entirely. No blood sugar spikes, no insulin crashes, no constant hunger cycles, just metabolic calm. When insulin stays low, fat loss becomes automatic, inflammation quiets, hormones rebalance, and the body finally operates the way it was designed to. This is not a trend, not a hack, not a shortcut. It is a return to metabolic truth. And once you understand that keto is not about eating fewer carbs, but about lowering insulin, you realize that weight loss is not something you force, but something your body allows when it finally feels safe enough to let go. Hunger was never a character flaw, and weight gain was never a lack of willpower. Yet for decades, people have been taught to fight their own biology, as if appetite were the enemy instead of a message. The shocking truth is that chronic hunger is not caused by eating too much food, but by eating foods that hijack hormones, inflame cells, and trap the body in a constant state of energy scarcity. Modern science now confirms that when insulin stays elevated and inflammation smolders beneath the surface, the brain interprets this as starvation, even in the presence of excess body fat. This is why people can be overweight, overfed, and still feel uncontrollably hungry. Zero-carb, hormone-friendly foods change this signal at its source. When carbohydrates are removed, insulin falls, and with it comes a cascade of hormonal corrections that quiet hunger instead of amplifying it. Ghrelin, the hormone that drives appetite, decreases significantly on ketogenic and zero-carb diets, while satiety hormones like leptin begin to function properly again. This matters because leptin resistance is one of the most devastating and overlooked drivers of obesity. In a leptin-resistant state, the brain cannot see stored body fat, so it demands more food endlessly. Research shows that lowering insulin improves leptin sensitivity, allowing the brain to finally recognize that energy is available, which is why hunger fades without effort. At the same time, zero-carb foods reduce systemic inflammation, a silent disease accelerator that disrupts nearly every metabolic pathway. Inflammation interferes with insulin signaling, damages mitochondria, and alters brain chemistry in ways that increase cravings for sugar and starch. Studies consistently demonstrate that ketogenic diets lower inflammatory markers such as C-reactive protein, TNF-alpha, and interleukin-6, which are strongly associated with obesity, cardiovascular disease, and accelerated aging. As inflammation decreases, cells regain their ability to produce energy efficiently, and fatigue begins to lift. This is why people often describe a sudden sense of calm, clarity, and control around food when they shift to zero-carb eating. The brain itself changes fuel sources, transitioning from glucose to ketones, which produce more energy per unit of oxygen and generate fewer reactive oxygen species. This metabolic efficiency reduces oxidative stress, a major contributor to neurodegeneration and mood disorders. Clinical research on epilepsy revealed this decades ago, showing that ketones stabilize neuronal firing and reduce excitotoxicity, and newer studies suggest similar mechanisms may protect against anxiety, depression, and cognitive decline. Weight loss, under these conditions, stops being a struggle because the body is no longer fighting itself. Fat loss becomes a biological response to hormonal balance, not a punishment for eating. When insulin is low, hormone-sensitive lipase activates, allowing fat cells to release stored energy freely. This energy availability tells the brain there is no emergency, so the stress hormone cortisol drops, further reducing abdominal fat storage. Cortisol is notorious for driving visceral fat accumulation, the most dangerous fat linked to heart disease and diabetes, and its reduction is a key reason zero-carb approaches disproportionately target belly fat. Even sleep improves, and this is not incidental. Poor sleep increases insulin resistance by up to 30% after just one night, according to controlled studies. Zero-carb diets stabilize blood sugar overnight, preventing the spikes and crashes that trigger nighttime cortisol release and awakenings. Better sleep further improves insulin sensitivity, creating a self-reinforcing cycle of metabolic healing. Perhaps most astonishing is how quickly this transformation can begin. Research shows insulin levels can drop within 24 to 48 hours of carbohydrate removal, and inflammatory markers begin declining within days. This rapid shift explains why people often feel different before they look different. Their bodies are healing at a molecular level long before visible weight loss occurs. And this healing extends beyond metabolism. Chronic inflammation is now recognized as a root cause of cancer progression, autoimmune disease, and accelerated aging. By removing insulin-spiking foods, zero-carb eating starves pathological processes that depend on glucose and inflammatory signaling. Some cancer cells, for example, rely almost exclusively on glucose fermentation for growth, a phenomenon known as the Warburg effect, which is why ketogenic metabolic therapy is being studied as an adjunct treatment in oncology. None of this requires obsession, counting, or punishment. Zero-carb foods simplify nutrition to its most biologically appropriate form. Protein repairs, fat fuels, and hormones regulate everything else automatically. When hunger disappears, inflammation quiets, and weight loss follows without force, something profound happens psychologically. People stop feeling broken. They stop blaming themselves. They realize their bodies were never the problem. The problem was a nutritional environment that kept insulin high, inflammation constant, and hunger loud. When that environment changes, the body responds with gratitude, efficiency, and resilience. This is the moment weight loss stops being a war and becomes a consequence. Not because you tried harder, but because your biology finally had the conditions it needed to work the way it was designed to all along.